hear us?
Oh yeah. Hey, Maxim. Was struggling to find the button.
No worries, and thank you very much for making it that early. I know it's 8 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 8. It's not bad at all. It's perfect. First thing in the morning.
All right, and if you don't mind, we just wait a couple of minutes. We hope Sean is going to wake up, because I know it's going to be much earlier for him in.
Yeah, he's on West Coast. Yeah.
So yeah, if you don't mind, we just wait a couple of minutes and then.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Cool. Got a very cool background.
Yeah, I try to have a good pictures of Bangkok, because unfortunately we can't do anything now. How is the situation?
Skyline.
Yeah.
Awesome. My brother, he used to live in Beijing. Now they're in Canada. They used to go to Thailand all the time. They love the place.
Yeah, it's still nice. We are lucky because we don't have so much COVID-19 casualties compared to the US.
Yeah.
But
that's
anyway.
what we saw. Yeah, Thailand has been faring the whole crisis pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm. And how do you cope with the situation?
We're doing fine. Where we live, the place is not as jam-packed in terms of the population as New York. Mm-hmm. So it's not as bad. Numbers are still growing, but we haven't seen the huge crisis we're seeing in New York. And we're lucky that we have like 3 huge, very well-known universities in the area. Each have a very big hospital. So we have 3 very high-quality hospital systems. So we should be pretty well prepared.
All right. Everybody's working from home? Yeah, nice shirt.
Yeah. It's been more than a month. Yeah, it hasn't really affected productivity that much. So you saw we just pushed out a pretty major release earlier last week. So yeah, it's been great.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I see that we have a couple of people and still in the waiting list. And if you don't mind, we just wait a couple of minutes for people to join. Yep. It's 7 o'clock here in Bangkok, and even if people are working from home, they are still working. So we just
no problem. Yeah, I think we don't start until, I guess, meetups it's really hard to tell. When we host it in our place, even when people show up, they may keep chatting, and there are good conversations you want to continue right before getting everybody to sit down. So yeah, no worries.
Normally the way we do it, after we do this Q&A, and we offer free beer and pizza for everybody to have the chance to chat. But the past 2 months we have been doing it online, like everybody else in the world. And hopefully maybe in June we can restart it live, hopefully.
Yeah, let's hope everything goes back to normal by then.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Guillaume says hello. He is next to me.
Oh, hi.
And
hi, Guillaume. So you guys are in the office?
No, we don't go anymore. Even if the office is still kind of open, but we are at home now. And it doesn't change much, for us, and the same for you. I mean, I think people are going to get used to it.
Yeah, luckily we can adjust to remote situations pretty well.
Okay.
For our industry, I guess.
Sean is here. One second.
Hi, Sean. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Brennan.
Hi, Sean. Hey, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good evening to you.
Did you have time for a coffee? Thank you so much for making it that early, Really much appreciated.
Of course, yeah, just early start to the day.
Yes.
Happy to be here. Glad to be here.
So much. And I really appreciate it. And all the Atato team, thank you very much. And we still have a couple of people joining tonight. So thank you very much for making it once again. So With Jim, we were discussing the situation of the COVID-19. I guess pretty much the same in California, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for the past about month and a half, it's been a lockdown. Everyone's indoors and everyone's just in Zoom meetings and working online. Same for you guys, I imagine.
All right. Yeah. Same for everybody. And okay, but yeah. Let's start. I think people are going to join anyway. I saw that, but first, thank you so much, both of you, for making it. I know it's difficult times, especially thank you to you, Zhang, for making it that early this morning. Just make a short introduction about us. We are Atato. We are a blockchain service provider based here in Bangkok. And actually, we are used to work with Kaleido and Infura, and I think it's a very great opportunity to have you both in order to present your product and solutions to the community here. So on the people that I see in the chat, we actually have developers, executive people from the crypto space. And the way that I want to do the conversation today is, sorry, I admit a couple of more people, is that maybe we can start first with Jim, a presentation of Kaleido, a couple of questions, and then after you, Zhang, and I think we will make a general Q&A after that. And for everybody in this meetup, please feel free to ask your questions on the chat, and we will share it with the host. And I think it's going to be much easier to do it that way. So yeah, thanks again. And yeah, Jim, the floor is yours if you want to start the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maxim. Everybody, this is Jim. Speaking to you from the U.S., the epicenter of the crisis. But luckily, everybody is safe as far as the team and family. So great to be here and speak to you guys about enterprise blockchain, the landscape, comparing that a little bit between the public side and enterprise side, and then what Kaleido is doing to make your adoption much easier. So let me start playing the slides. Can you guys see the slides okay?
Yes, it's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Let's get started. So before we dive in, just one slide on what Kaleido does. So Kaleido used to be a project under incubation by Consensus. As you know, Consensus is the biggest pure play blockchain company in the world, founded by a co-founder of Ethereum, Joe Lubin. So we started the company under Consensus about 2.5 years ago. And as of 1st of April, this month, we graduated and became independent. So Kaleido now is an independent company focused on cloud-based SaaS services to help enterprises adopt blockchain and make enterprise blockchain much easier for companies and industries to pick up and build decentralized solutions. We support AWS and Microsoft Azure. We do this a little bit differently than some of the other players in the place, in that we actually support the same network that have nodes in both places. So you can create a blockchain network that has nodes in AWS and Azure. In fact, also pretty much anywhere, can be in your own data center, can be in your own dedicated accounts in the cloud provider anywhere. So we also support hybrids deployment beside AWS and Azure. And let's first just spend a few slides on, since today's topic is public blockchain and enterprise blockchain, Zhang will go into much more details about what Infura is doing with the public side. But the first thing I like to touch on is how pretty much two separate different worlds you're seeing with public blockchain versus enterprise blockchain. What you see on the left is a representation of the activities that are happening in the public blockchain side. So it's because permissionless, anybody can join, can host a node, can send transactions, and there are lots of activities on the public blockchains from any corner of the world. What you see in this pretty exciting diagram is happening between the space of 12 minutes when Gnosis, which is a Ethereum-based prediction market project, was raising through an ICO in 2017. So within 12 minutes, they were able to raise 12 million, which is one of the more successful ICOs in history. And many people, including many big funds, joined that activity. So you see very exciting and very decentralized activities happening on the left side. On the right-hand side, at least where things stand now, and also in the foreseeable future with enterprise adoption of blockchain, you see things in more controlled manner, and they tend to be isolated from each other by industry and by ecosystems. So you may have a consortium chain for payment, for real estate, for sovereign identity, and because it's permissioned, participants have to be invited to join the chain. As a result, you see not individuals but organizations being players inside an enterprise blockchain. And the number of participants tend to be much smaller. So going a little deeper, with public Ethereum, of course, Ethereum is not the only public blockchain, but so far it's been second biggest in terms of the capital size, and definitely the most active in terms of developer community and the number of projects that are built on it. With public Ethereum, you have at any point in time more than 10,000 nodes that are hosted by many different organizations, institutions, companies, and individuals from around the world. And because of that, it's really tamper-proof, tamper-resistant, and censor-resistant. So transactions you send to Ethereum, the mainnet can never be taken away because there are that many copies of it, and each of them it has been validated to be legitimate. And transactions on Ethereum are not private because they're synonymous. They're sent by just a random key, and nobody knows who's behind the key. So there's no strong identity between transactions. They're just signing keys. And transaction throughput has been pretty stable, around 15 to 20 transactions per second. That may sound low, but actually it's a pretty high transaction throughput, and it's actually able to sustain many different use cases, and I would argue most use cases for blockchain. Even a lot of customers we've seen that are using permission chains that have much higher throughput, their use cases can be supported with a transaction rate about 15 to 20. And tokenization has been the main use case on public Ethereum, and the algorithm as of now is proof of work, which uses brute force way to find a hash. And of course, the community is working on the 2.0 version that has a more efficient algorithm for proof of stake. So now let's transition to the enterprise side. Ethereum community has been focusing on supporting the enterprise adoption about 3 years ago, if not longer. It's led by JP Morgan Chase with the release of Quorum. Quorum is by far the most popular enterprise Ethereum protocol. And since then, others have joined the play. Hyperledger Besu, which is the latest entry to that place. Both are really robust protocols for enterprise use. On the enterprise side, what you see is now you have, because you have to invite participants into the chain, and everybody's identity must be strongly tied to their organization, you tend to see a much smaller number of players in those chains. And it's also a result of where the industry is. A lot of industries are still having not a single industry-wide consortium, but many number of consortiums that are led by major players in that industry, each hoping to become the de facto standard for that industry. So you still see a large number of instances of blockchains on the enterprise side, rather than small, huge number of public Ethereums. The transactions on enterprise side are gas-free, so you don't have to pay for transactions with Ether. Of course, you can, if you want, you actually have full control of how much gas you want to charge for transactions on the when you set up the chain. So things that like ZK, zero knowledge proof kind of transactions that either take a lot of compute power to validate the proof, or the proof size is really big, like with bullet proofs. They used to cost a lot of gas if you send it to mainnet, but on the enterprise side, gas is free, so all the transactions are free, and these things can happen comfortably in the enterprise blockchain. And transaction throughput can be much higher because the consensus algorithm used here is more efficient than proof of work. You get Raft, which is a very robust consensus algorithm used by popular distributed systems like etcd or Kubernetes. IBFT, proof of authority, these are more decentralized that can have Byzantine fault tolerance. And if you want, you can also run a proof of work and proof of stake on the enterprise side. So we see three major protocols that customers are using to build enterprise blockchain solutions. Hyperledger Fabric is by far the most widely adopted because it's the first entry in this place. I actually used to be on the committer team for Hyperledger Fabric when I still worked with IBM before starting Kaleido, and still talk to that team. It's a very vibrant community with developers from anywhere, both IBM and outside, contributing to that project. Ethereum is not a single base code base. As of now, there are more than 3 implementations of enterprise Ethereum. Hyperledger Besu is produced by Consensus, a team called Pegasus, and it's based on Java. It's a completely new code base. Quorum is a fork of Geth, which is based on Go, and Clearmatic's The protocol is actually called Alternity. Clearmatics is a team based in London. It's also a fork of Geth. Corda is another popular protocol. It tends to be focused on insurance and financial industries. So that's a more custom-built protocol for those industries. As far as the things that enterprise customers care about when they look at blockchain as the underlying technology, we see all of these things that you tend to see on the checklist for any enterprise IT project. Privacy tend to be among the top, and so this may be for both regulation purposes, but also for protecting their customer data. Performance and scalability, because of the mission critical system nature, they need faster time to finality, and they need higher throughput. They like to have control of where the data is saved. So unlike public Ethereum, where anybody can download the software and join the network and have a full copy of the transactions, on the enterprise side, they tend to have they want to have higher control of where all the data and all the transactions are saved. Reliability-wise, they like to have their node be more SLA bound, so they can have better IT operation behind them. And finally, ISO, for audit purposes and for certification of security and engineering practices-wise, especially if you work with highly regulated industries or with the government. So what is Kaleido doing to make all that checklist possible for our customers? So Kaleido is focused on building business networks. So our platform supports building business networks from any industry. We're actually working very closely with Atato on many projects that are active in Thailand and elsewhere. We make everything very simple. So we have a very intuitive UI that's been there since day one, and we actually just revamped the whole UI experience with our latest release that came out last week. So I'll show you a demo after the slides. And everything is possible that you can do in the UI is possible through APIs. So Kaleido is 100% API enabled. You can manage your resources, you can manage your participants, membership, everything through APIs. And because this is built for enterprise, we care about SLAs, where 99.9% available through SLA contracts, and where we just achieved our ISO 9017 certification, which is a very important step to working with regulated industries and governments. Even though Kaleido is a special platform based on blockchain, blockchain is only a small portion of our platform, because we saw with working with our customers, building a blockchain-based solutions is a pretty complex undertaking, and the blockchain itself only makes up about 5 to 10% of the whole solution. For the rest of the solutions, you have a lot of components that are running off the chain, and you have other traditional IT concerns with security, authentication, database, all that. So we built Kaleido to support that stack. So we not only make blockchain very easy to use, we also built many components that make the rest 95% very easy to build. And this is what the platform looks like. So on the data layer, on the transactions, supporting transactions, middleware for messaging, for reliable delivery of messages and connectivity, and finally, building digital assets in the application layer with different cryptographic techniques, and also have a REST API gateway. So when you interact with your blockchain and with your smart contract, you don't have to learn Web3. You don't have to understand how to estimate gas and how to manage your nonce. You just call an API, just like when you're building a web or mobile applications, a REST API that all the developers have already understood how to use, and we take care of the nonce management and all that complex Web3 stuff behind the scene for you. So it's a very rich, feature-rich, custom-built for enterprise adoption kind of platform. And we have many customers that are already in production with us. Our first major production customer was Union Bank, which is pretty close to Thailand. They're based in the Philippines. And it's a consortium of banks in Philippines that make payments much easier across the banks. So their customers from different banks can utilize this cross-bank platform to make payments much easier. And Congo went into production since December 2018. It's a major global trade finance consortium made up of Europe's top 20 banks, and they've since going to production, they've traded close to $1 billion on the platform that they built on Kaleido, and many other major commercial and also governmental customers. Just to give an example of Congo, they built their solution and were able to roll out the first version in 4 months. So from start to going to production, sending the very first transaction in 4 months. So they were able to do that without having any prior skills on blockchain, because they don't need to worry about blockchain, since Kaleido is taking care of everything for them on the platform. So that's a pretty major adoption by the industry. So now I'm going to spend a few slides on some detailed aspects of what enterprise tend to look for when they go into a platform that they will use to build blockchains. So privacy, as I mentioned, is very important and top on the list. So with privacy, there are many, many aspects. It can be obfuscation of certain identities that you don't want to disclose when you send transactions. It can be you want to hide the transaction payload. So unless you are counterparties of the transaction, you don't want people to see who is sending what to who. You may want to have off-chain transactions happening without involving the chain, but then have some proof that this transaction happened between those parties, have the proof sent to the chain, both in terms of commitment, so they can be validated, but they can't be reverse engineered, or you want to send it a zero knowledge proof, so all the participants, including both the counterparties and counterparties can validate that the transaction happened in an honest and valid way, but they don't know what actually happened. So you have all these different concerns, and you have different technologies that can address them. Kaleido pretty much supports everything that's listed on this slide. We have HD wallet that you can use to use a different identity to send for every transaction. And with every HD wallet instance, you get 2 billion signing keys for free, all derived from a single master seed. So that's a very popular way to mask your identity, because every transaction uses a seemingly random signing key. We have off-chain messaging system. So when customers want to actually conduct their transactions off the chain, they can use that, and it's end-to-end encrypted, and nobody else can see the payload unless you have the encryption key that are held by the senders and the counterparties of the transaction. We also have zero-knowledge proof services that makes adopting zero-knowledge proof-based token transactions very easy. You don't have to understand how zero-knowledge proof works and how to set up a token to make that work for you. And we have oftentimes when customers think about privacy, they care about their keys, and they want to make sure the signing keys that represent their identity is secure. And sometimes they want to have full control of the keys. So they don't want the key to live inside Kaleido, they want the key to live in their own cloud accounts. We just released a cloud HSM based signing service, so that you can provision a cloud HSM in AWS or Azure, or if you want to install your own HSM service, you can use HashiCorp with our extension to do this, and then you provision the Kaleido Cloud HSM service, and then that becomes your JSON RPC service. You send it the transaction, it'll call your HSM backend to send it, and then it forward it to the chain. So you can treat it as a node, a JSON RPC service, and you can be assured that your signing keys is safe because it never leaves your HSM account. I'll actually skip this slide. This is just the technique to create separate instances blockchains to make sure data is isolated, and only the parties that are supposed to join the transaction will be invited to the chain. So this is the most straightforward way to keep your data safe. Or if you want to invite many parties to the same chain, but on the per transaction basis, you want to keep the transaction just between a subset of parties, then you can use the private transaction technique. This is first designed by the Quorum team, and it's since been improved upon and adopted by Hyperledger Besu team. So both teams have been working closely under the EEA to make this private transaction part of the spec. So this is basically automating a flow where transactions are happening off the chain, and a proof of the transaction in the form of a hash is sent to the chain. So there's a irrefutable proof that the transaction happened between those parties. I mentioned we support HD wallet. You can, with an API call, have your HD wallet service, and then from there you get unlimited supply of signing keys, and you can use to sign transactions. So your competitors can trace your trading pattern. I mentioned off-chain secure message transfer. So using a enterprise strength queue under the cover based on Kafka, this uses reliable delivery of messaging that are encrypted end-to-end. So you can use this to coordinate transactions with secure messages. Some of the transactions may require more than just messages, but also document exchange. So we have a document store that works by and large the same way. The documents, if they are large, they will be chopped into pieces and sent to your counterparty. And after the transaction is complete, a hash is taken and the whole transaction is signed, and there's a proof for the transaction that can be sent to the chain. We support Chainlink that connects your blockchain ecosystem to the outside world. So your smart contract can be told what the latest information from the outside world is. So that's a very popular technology for doing oracles, to send data from outside world into the chain. Kaleido is part of the Hyperledger Avalon founding members of that project for doing trusted off-chain compute. So oftentimes, either because of privacy purposes or because of the heavy compute that are involved for your transactions, you want to offload the compute or the data from your smart contract and do that off the chain. So now the problem is, how do you prove that the data that's used in the off-chain component and the processing on it are honest, and there's no manipulation with either the data or the processing? So you need to prove to the participants that this is all done in an honest way. So Intel has been leading this project with their SGX technology, and we're also inviting other participants to have zero-knowledge proof-based off-chain compute all plugged into that framework. As I mentioned, zero-knowledge proof, there are different technologies to enable this. ZK Snark, ZK Stark, bulletproof tend to be the ones that are more mature than the others. Kaleido has a service that's based on bulletproof that makes token transfers secure based on zero-knowledge proof, because no transactions are sent to the chain in clear text. They're all zero-knowledge proof payloads. This is the last slide. So Kaleido, if you want to give it a try, if you haven't seen it, go to kaleido.io, and we have a perpetual tier. It takes literally a minute or so to get started, and in 5 more minutes you can get yourself a blockchain running with up to 4 nodes, and you don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting of understanding how these chains work and how to use them. Within 10 minutes, you get yourself a chain and you can start building it. So now let's take a look at how exactly this works under the cover. So move this away to the side. So this is what Kaleido looks like. It used to look very differently, but as of last week, we just released our UI v2, and this is what it looks like. So when you are first signed in, you land in the dashboard where you see your consortium. We see, we call our consortium networks. Any customer can be part of many networks. As of now, I'm just part of a single network. So let's go into that network. This is a network that's homed in US in AWS, but it's got 2 other regions. So within the network, you can create environments which are instances of blockchains. Why you might need more than one blockchain is maybe one is for that purposes, another for staging, another for user acceptance test, and finally one for production. So you can use these different separate instances to build a development pipeline. So in this example, we have one environment, and actually let me use a different login. Let me take you to this one. So in this account, I'm part of 3 networks, and one of these networks have pretty big environments. Let's go and take a look. So this environment has 10 nodes and many, many services. So services are the things that I mentioned as the off-chain. Most of them are off-chain components. Some of them are on-chain components like token swaps and zero-knowledge proof tokens. Others are off-chain components like IPFS for distributed file sharing, app-to-app, secure messaging, and so on and so forth. With Kaleido, we have the concept of networks to represent a consortium. So that's more representing the collection of organizations that need to work together. And then you have the physical blockchain instances, we call them environments. And within each environment, obviously you have blockchain nodes, so they are listed here. And different participants can choose to provision their own nodes, and they have admin privileges to their own nodes. But because this is a decentralized system, everybody can see who owns what node. But unless this is a node that's under your administration, you won't be able to, for example, start and stop it. Only the admin owner can do that. You can also add services to it to make building the solution much easier. And you have very detailed metrics information on any level of the resources. Right now, we're seeing the overall CPU utilization of the entire network by node. So you can see that this node at this point was pretty active. Maybe this is a private transaction that happened between 2 nodes that drove up the CPU usage. And if you also have activity log, because of the decentralized nature, it's important that everybody have visibility to what's happening, what others are doing with the blockchain. So these are audit trail events that are visible to the entire blockchain participants. So, for example, if someone restarted their node or stopped their node, they will be logged here, and everybody can see it. You can go into more details. So you can look at both CPU and memory and disk usage for every node. And then at some point you want to deploy contracts and send transactions. So we've built a very useful block explorer So you can see for every block how many transactions. This is our demo environment, so we send periodic transactions to it. So every block has at least one transactions in it, and we've accumulated close to 4 million blocks so far, and about 14 million transactions on this chain. So it's been running for a while, and you can see all of the last 100 blocks, all the transactions succeeded, and there's no failure.
Hey, Jim. First, thank you so much for the presentation. I mean, it's very complete, and I think on the chat, Jackson had one question. How do you basically manage the entry in the consortium? And can you see the chat, by the way?
Yeah, I can.
So
absolutely. Let's see.
So we have 5 parties, including, I mean,
yes,
a team running a set of smart contracts.
Sure. So let me go to the consortium governance. So obviously, someone has to start the consortium, and then under each consortium, you have memberships. Every membership represents a different organization, and each organization is assigned certain privileges. So you can decide that when you invite other organizations, what kind of privileges they have. You can invite them to be co-administrators with you, so they have full privilege just like you, or you can take away some of the privileges, like, for example, they won't be able to provision signers. They can only provision non-signers. They can have multiple memberships or single membership. They can deploy contracts or can only send transactions. So you can decide when you invite other organizations to join your consortium. When they receive the invitation, they can easily create an account and join the consortium.
All right, then thank you very much for the reply. And yeah, again, thank you very much for the presentation. Very complete, as I mentioned. Maybe about public and private blockchain, I know you talked about it already, but could you just recap very quickly why enterprises would be turning into private blockchain instead of public, and what are the advantages? You mentioned them already, but I think it's important for the audience to understand that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a nature with the industry versus individual consumers, that they care about where their data will be saved. They care about privacy of the transactions, both in terms of the identity of the counterparties, but also the payload, the content of the transactions. Because of these, and also, I guess, they want to have full control of the membership, so that unless they are invited to join that consortium, they don't want random parties to show up and can see the whole transaction history. Because of those factors, most customers would feel better when they have a permission chain rather than a permissionless chain. So that's a very good starting point for them to start building this. On the other hand, a public chain can also support many privacy techniques. And we're seeing some activities, on the enterprise side with public blockchain, but most of our customers are building their solutions on the private permissioned chains.
Okay, that's that's one of the points as well that we often have with clients here, and it's always important that we recap those facts. And before we go to Sean, I just have a quick question, general one. I will ask the same to Sean. What is your view on Ethereum 2.0, which is normally coming in July, and what will implicate for Kaleido, and how do you see the future?
Yeah, sure. We think we've been monitoring Ethereum 2.0 very closely. In fact, some of our colleagues back in Consensus are heavily involved in that. So we're have constant checkup with them. I think it's going to be a game changer because it's a massively more scalable than the current version. And because it supports different kinds of they call it execution environments, you can have different types of child chains that are hanging off of the beacon chain. We're looking forward to having a world where enterprise blockchains can use the beacon chain as sort of a coordination layer, because where customers are today they're focusing on building their consortium blockchains. So you end up with many instances of these, both in the same industry but also across industry. But eventually they will realize they really need interoperability among those instances so that you can do trading on one chain and you can do payment on the other, and they need to be conducted in an atomic way and be coordinated. So Ethereum 2.0 is a very promising technology to make interop among those instances seamless and trustworthy. So we're very excited about that.
All right, thank you. I think there is some questions on the chat, but I think it's better that we ask Zhang to make the presentation, because some of those questions might be interesting for him as well. So let's do Infura's presentation if you want. Jim, thank you so much again. And after, there will be some Q&A, and we're gonna review the questions that you're asking.
Absolutely.
Zhang, I hope the coffee is good, and the floor is yours. Thank you. I think you are still on mute. Yeah, sir. Sorry, it's me. I need to. All right.
Cool.
My bad. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Maxime. No problem. Thanks, Jim. That was great. I definitely, in the general Q&A, would want to chat with you about the HSM security signing and like HashiCorp. I think that's really, I just learned about that, and I think that's really cool. But cool, getting into the Consensus Infura side of things. Let me share my screen. A bit of introduction about me. Let me get this going. Okay, that should be all set now. I have a background in DevOps. I joined MakerDAO in 2017 and helped launch the DAI stablecoin, and recently joined Infura in December as the developer relations lead, helping grow adoption and education around how to use Infura and other consensus technologies. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, just if you have questions in the chat, hopefully I can either answer them as they come up or at the end. And the two main products I'll talk about today are Infura and what Pegasus has. Infura.io.register is a link to sign up, and Pegasus.tech is Pegasus links. Well, cool. So public versus private. As a whole, Infura is on the public side of things. Pegasus and some others are on the enterprise, the private side of enterprise. And I'm on the Infura team. I'll do my best to talk about what Pegasus offers, but if you have specific questions about Pegasus and the Bezu client and some other offerings they have, I can put you in touch with some great people who can really help out. So I guess the thesis of Consensus is that these blockchain ecosystems are going to converge around Ethereum, and the interoperability between these chains will happen as Ethereum being the backbone, where there's different bridges possible, and basically each chain is set up to talk to Ethereum and transact, do cross-chain swaps over Ethereum, and that's the main thesis of consensus and trying to support that. We basically are one of the, if not the biggest blockchain company. We have a ton of active projects, a ton of active clients and companies building on consensus technology, and we're all over the world. And with Pegasus and Infura, they're two huge parts of what consensus is doing. So on a more specific level, the Web3 is a general term for anything blockchain related, where it's the next version of the web. It's a bit overloaded of a term. It has a bunch of meanings, but in this case, we're referring to a blockchain connection. So if you're Web3 enabled, if you have a active blockchain connection. So this approach, we're encoding value into these digital assets, and the shared ledger is either public or private, and the trust of the network is either in the proof of work or eventually proof of stake model, or in proof of authority, or basically you're trusting a smaller set of operators with full control of the network in private. And either way, you do that because you can agree on a set of mutual rules. Basically, you can open source the protocols and the rules of the blockchain, and then that shared trust and how those rules operate allow even competing businesses. So businesses that might not trust, basically they wouldn't run a competitor software themselves, but if each business agrees on running the blockchain software, they basically benefit as a whole by agreeing to these protocols. Usually the standardization of things happen because if you buy into the standardization and if you go through the process of standardizing, you see a return on your investment of time and energy to do that. And so that's why these businesses are working together, going into a consortium and standardizing around a private blockchain protocol, and then seeing the benefits from that. One thing I'll get into later is how even those private chains there's certain things I'll talk about where those private chains do still use Ethereum, the public Ethereum chain, as the backbone. But you're seeing that. And so yeah, the benefits, I already talked about that, but you basically you get some performance improvements in new markets, global markets that you didn't see before. The problem is there's a huge gap in education and infrastructure that we're seeing between companies that are used to the Web 2 way and now are trying to get into the Web 3. And these are the problems that maybe me and my capacity to develop relations is mainly focused on solving. Education, how to get enterprise developers who have spent their entire lives with a specific setup, maybe the Rails developers or Java, C++, these established coding languages that have very established best practices, and how do you one, convince them that blockchain is worth looking at, and two, educate them on the tools available to them, and basically get them up to be able to either write Solidity code or write front ends that I'll get into. And so that's what we're thinking about. And here's sort of how consensus is. We've gone through some changes at consensus in the past couple months. Basically, over the next year, we're going to be integrating into more of a cohesive structure where we'll have developer tools that manage infrastructure, platform APIs to support the use cases, and protocol and enterprise infrastructure. So here's I think the chat is blocking. There we go. So the current demand, the biggest thing is supply chain, global trade, and where these very specific checkpoints in custody can be put onto the blockchain, and a lot of companies are seeing current benefits from doing that. And then it goes through the more emerging novel use cases where it's asset management, institutional markets, payments and money, DeFi, developer tools, and protocol infrastructure. And these last two, developer tools and protocol, are really the ones that enable the use cases on the left. And so it still feels like it's very new when you're a developer coming to space and trying to figure out what to know. Basically, the problem is knowing what you don't know and how you educate a new developer coming in and how to, as I said, write Web3 code and create a global trade software system. And so consensus has a few different things to do that. Academy is very useful. They have a great set of programs. And I think starting with that, and we're working on a developer portal to basically help people get through from the right side and be able to create applications on the left side of this slide. Oops. Okay. So going back to the structure of the new consensus, we have MetaMask and Infura in the developer tools. Codify is going to be basically a platform API for different use cases. And then we have Pegasus, which is the enterprise blockchain suite where there's Orchestrate and Hyperledger Bezu and Pegasus Plus, which is their premium service. The Orchestrate's a transaction manager, and then they have an Ethereum client of Hyperledger Bezu, which is really, really good. I don't know if you've tried installing it, but they've really done some great work in making it easy to set up. It syncs really fast, and they have a ton of great documentation and testing for it. I'd really recommend checking it out. And then they have Orion and eSigner, which are enterprise plugins that are also very useful. This is Pegasus's basically a partner customer list. They have a ton of people. And again, I'll skip over this slide. And then, so this is why you'd choose public or private. In some cases, you have to think about these things. Permissioning, you control who can participate and what actions they can take on the blockchain. Privacy groups and transactions. Encryption at rest is something to think about, where if you have network data being moved around, different payloads, different companies interacting with it, if you have certain things, especially around healthcare or just proprietary data, encrypting it. And then, like Jim talked about with the key management systems, enterprises are used to working with things like Azure Key Vault or HashiCorp Vault. And so supporting, working with those is important. And then So yeah, Pegasus has ways of working with all these event streaming, validators, stable consensus, all good things. And then I think lastly with Pegasus, these are when you are building an application, a program that works with the private blockchain, you have to think about gas management, nonce management, all these things. And in my opinion, when you're on the Ethereum public chain, there's probably a wealth of information out there to help with each of these things. But when you start working with a private chain for the first time, it's either based on Ethereum or new. And so all these might not have, when your developers are trying to figure out these things, finding the best practices are a bit harder. And so that's one thing to think about. And all these things can be simplified by using Pegasus Orchestrate. So identity management, gas management, all these things. And so it's a great software to use. And then the last thing about Pegasus I want to talk about is this really cool paper they published this year in April. It's on atomic cross-chain transactions, and it's basically between any chain. It's a very technical paper, but they think they found a way to have atomic cross-chain transactions between blockchains. And so this is sort of a game changer for public versus private. And so what atomic means is that it's basically reversible. And so a transaction can't be changed halfway through. It's either in one state or another state. And so when you're doing these cross chains, it means you can have various, like a spectrum of trust between one chain and then another. And so the question this raises is that if tokens on a private chain are less strict in their permissions by the nature of it being on a private chain with a smaller number of controllers, if those tokens can be frozen or minted without constraints, basically deleted or mint infinite tokens, how do you make sure it has value when you switch it to a public chain? And so the permissions on the private chains will start to look like the tokens on public chains, is my opinion. And so you have to think about the reasons why you'd want to build on a private blockchain. And I can get into some of my opinions on that in the Q&A. So I'm getting to Infura. So there's a lot of text on the screen, but basically we're basically a self-service software, a SaaS service where we have a Ethereum JSON RPC API, which feels just like talking to a local node, a local client. And so by working with Infura, you have the benefit of a 99.999% uptime on a node. And then you don't have to worry about the DevOps behind it. You don't have to worry about updating the client, and it's free to start with. And so you can do all the things with Ethereum, and also IPFS is a lesser known fact that we support an IPFS API. But yeah, so our potential user base I think there's around 200,000 active Ethereum IPFS developers and around 24 million developers worldwide. And so we're trying to grow that 200,000 to get more of the 24 million developers aware of Web3. And so for enterprise customers, Infura's entry point is through developers, where individual contributors inside large organizations can learn about Infura and start pilot projects or basically work and educate their own colleagues by sharing how easy Infura is to work with. And so here's just a number of companies that work with Infura. And Infura is really it's one line of code to implement Infura on these Web3 libraries. And so here's an example at the bottom where you just put in a use Web3 and you put in your Infura API key to the URL and you have your Web3 connection. So my proficiency lately has been in how to build front ends for Web3. And so briefly, just these are the parts of it. Web3 library, you have your JS code, JavaScript code with React, user wallets are part of it, Web3 connection, testnets, and then how do you get real-time state? And so as an example, here's the Uniswap front end. It's simple, but there's a lot of moving parts to this, and Infura is using all of them. So all those things I mentioned, Web3 libraries are how you set up your Web3 connection, which by default for Uniswap and many others is Infura. You have your JavaScript code libraries that simplify front-end development. The user wallet is like MetaMask or Fortmatic or all those. And many of those under the hood use default to Infura as their connection. And it's nice with Web3 connections, you can set up like a fallback structure where it kind of cascades down a preferred list of connections. And if one doesn't, for example, if Infura isn't fast enough to respond, it can go to the next one. And so you basically have it's very easy to set up that backup structure. And then supporting different testnets. And then an example I'll show is real-time state. So as these blockchains update every couple seconds, every 13 seconds in the case of Ethereum, how do you as quickly as possible catch that state update and display it to the user? So all these Web3 libraries are instrumental in that. So basically any language you can think of has a Web3 library that you can write projects in, and each of these has a place where you put in a provider, and the provider can be different things, including I think Kaleido probably has their connection, but Infura through the link I posted before, Infura as your provider is an easy way to do it. Here are an example of all the different like user wallets for a couple different Compound, Uniswap, MakerDAO, Oasis, and KaiRoswap. And so each of these, whether it's MetaMask or the site itself defaults, they can default to Infura. And so Infura is a part of each of these. And then the example I want to show is real-time front ends. And so these are really cool libraries. It's even this is applicable to enterprise development, because really enterprise development will take off if you have really cool, really good UX and good websites for users to interact with. And so I want to recommend these two libraries to look at, Embark Subspace and Truffle's Drizzle. They both are ways of looking at real-time data coming from blockchains and updating your front end, and specifically a React front end, to deal with that. There's briefly, basically track events. So on Ethereum, when contracts emit log events, you can track what those are, and then you can track specific user balances and that thing with Embark. And Truffle Drizzle also has similar functionality. And so I wrote a very quick demo. There's on our Infura's blog, there's a tutorial on how to create this website on the right. It's basically tracking the DAI to ETH trades on Uniswap, and it shows the last five. Excuse me. It shows the last 5 on your front end, and you can see in the data it has the transaction data associated with it. And here's just the most recent 3, but as more come in, it'll show 5, and then the oldest will fall off the stack. And so this is just a simple example of how you can get real-time updates on your website, tracking contract data or Ethereum events. And this should work for private chains where you just put in a different, basically a different URL to track, and you should still get the library to work with private chains too. And basically front-end development is getting easier, which is great. There's basically a better UX and a lot more people won't be turned off from problems with the front end. And on that note, like a company like MakerDAO has many different web properties with different users where you can trade stablecoins, vote on proposals, and open vault positions. They've set up their web properties to default to relying on Infura if the user doesn't have an injected provider themselves. And so you just get a consistent user experience and coding pattern for your developers. And yeah, I think it's really great to support the ecosystem that way.
Sean, actually, regarding the slide, thank you first. Thank you so much for the presentation again. Since talking about enterprises, what are the enterprises application that you see running on Infura today? Can you give us a couple of examples?
So enterprise, the specific enterprise use cases for consensus are mainly through the Pegasus and Codify pieces of it, which in itself rely, basically Infura is like a bottom layer, a base layer. And so different ones are basically part of the stack. And there's many large companies that use Infura as their Ethereum connection. It's almost so simple that it's hard to talk about more, but basically they use it instead of running a local Ethereum node or a cloud node, they just use Infura as their Ethereum connection.
Any big companies? I mean, you are going to talk about Baseline, and very excited about it. But any big companies running Infura on the public net today?
There are I guess the so I mean, we have relationships with Microsoft, and like VS Code has an Infura extension. There's the Opera browser. A lot of the companies that you see with Pegasus, the more enterprise in that sense, they're using Infura under the hood, but it's sometimes a bit hard for Infura to tell exactly who's using us, because just the nature of how we set up the developer keys and making it so simple to use that
you're not very aware. Yeah. Okay. And thank you. And Baseline.
And then, the last thing I just wanted to mention is the last month Ernst & Young and Consensus released a joint project called Baseline, which is basically a framework for writing either private chains and then using Ethereum the mainnet as an auditable common firm of reference. Basically has that shared trust between, it's basically a consortium with code on the Ethereum mainnet as the shared trust, and it uses zero knowledge proofs to verify execution of private transactions. And really just want to shout it out at the end and say, go check it out. It's on the GitHub link there, Ethereum-Oasis/Baseline. And yeah, thank you. Thank you
so much, Sean. Thank you first for making it that early, and for the extensive presentation. And I saw that people are actually chatting, but I may have one question for you. I asked it to Jim first, but what would be the implication of Ethereum 2.0 for Infura in the coming years? Can you expand on this?
Basically, we've been extensively testing it. We have developers devoted to working with the Ethereum 2.0 clients and making sure that Infura fully supports it at launch. Basically, we're really stoked for it, and it'll be, Infura's been around for 3+ years, and it'll be I guess kind of more of the same, in the sense that it'll just be another Ethereum API that just works. But yeah, we fully plan to support it and offer some new features around it too.
Okay, and thank you. I have one question actually. The thing is, I know it's kind of basic. We talked about it already, but for us it's very important because you know, when we discuss with clients to integrate blockchain platform in their existing IT system, what are basically the advantages of public over private and the other way around? This is a question that is often rising. So can I just have your takes, both of you, on this one?
Yeah, I think so. When you're on the public chain, for example, public Ethereum mainnet, you have you can interact with different basically anything else on the public chain is things there for you to interact with. And so, for example, of DeFi, for example, the MakerDAO DAI stablecoin or USDT or USDC, you can access and make those things part of your application, which on a private chain would be, I think, much harder. But I think Jim might have a better answer on why private chains. I think Kaleido has a much more robust feature set for working with private chains.
Yeah, Jim, you want to expand quickly?
Yeah, so I guess there are many different aspects that may drive the decision. I think enterprises, just based on where they came from, you know, where most of the enterprises came from, they would feel much more comfortable exploring with private permission chains where they have, you know, total control of what's happening, rather than trying to understand this very different space called public chain. That's very different in terms of operational practices, security, checklists, and, you know, regulation. So I think, you know, especially when you talk to a CISO kind of person that has huge list of stuff that you have to check off every single one of them before they sign off to adopt a platform. It's tend to be much easier to go through that list with a private chain rather than a public chain. Not saying public chain is not possible. You know, things like Baseline that Consensus, Microsoft, and UI are exploring is pretty exciting. But I think we're still in the early days of blockchain, especially enterprise adoption. I'm very excited to see, you know, the threads on both sides progressing, and at least where things are, most of the enterprise adoption are still on the enterprise side. But I think with Ethereum 2.0, there's more and more focus being put on interoperability. I think there's going to be more interaction between private chains and public chains. Public chains is a perfect place to, number one, put things that are supposed to be there that nobody can take away. You know, proofs, hashes, that sort of stuff. Even enterprises should do that. Kaleido actually has a service, we call it Tether, that takes periodic checkpoints of your private blockchain states, make a hash and send it to Ethereum mainnet. So that way we utilize the mainnet's temper resistance and the 10,000 copies around the world to protect your private state, so nobody can hack it and tamper with it. So I think the smart customers will look at both for their value, and rather than saying I'm going to go this way or that way.
Well, thank you. I think you already replied to a couple of questions that I that I had prepared, but I think on a general side, we have seen that the internet connect private networks across the world, and it's kind of to finish on this. What would be your vision about what would be enterprise blockchain in the next coming years? I think it's going to be a mix of private and public, but can I just have your personal opinion on this one? And
glad to share with it.
Sure. Sean, you want to go? Sorry, I need again. There was something wrong. 1 second. Should be fine now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think it'll definitely be a mix. I think as Jim is saying, there's a ton of benefits for enterprise, like already large established corporations to build on private Ethereum, build on private enterprise chains, and then there's going to be a lot more things like baseline and improvements and features around like baseline type things that allow a ton more interoperability, which are these bridges between chains. And so I think you're going to see a mix of both, with the majority of financial transactions in the sense of like DeFi and consumer tokens trading happening on the public chain. And for just like corporations have their own private databases now, I think the database model for certain things will switch over to blockchains.
Okay. Jim, you want to add something?
Yeah. So I guess it's public blockchain is definitely the perfect place to run a large economy across the world. That's where all of the tokens are, and especially if you want to have that be tied to the real economy, I think that's a very good place. So stable coins, they're all public chains. Of course, you also have private implementations of that, similar things to play by huge banks like JP Morgan, the JPM coin, and other similar projects. Libra is the permission chain. So I guess it's just a matter of using the technology for its strength. And I still think more and more we're going to see more interactions between the two. I don't know if one will win over the other. I really don't think I really think it's always going to have, the world is always going to have both choices for the strength they have.
And maybe just you touch about it a little bit in your presentation, but what about Fabric and Corda? That's
so there's I can give a short version, and there's a long version. I published a pretty long blog on Kaleido.io that compares the three in very deep details, and it's been peer reviewed by all three communities. So Fabric tend to be a more general purpose, and it's so far the largest in terms of customer usage. They have their own design special design decisions that makes it sometimes easier, but other times more difficult compared to the other platforms. Corda tend to be more, because number one, with Corda, you don't have a shared ledger. It's always UTX, so it's always peer-to-peer, and which means it's a pretty different type of use cases you're going to build with Corda versus Ethereum or Fabric. But architecturally, Corda is very similar to Fabric. Many people may find this to be a surprise, but all three have their major adoptions with customers small and big. So you can't really go wrong with any of them, honestly. There's rarely a case where, based on my requirements, it has to be one of this. It has to be Fabric, it has to be Ethereum, or it has to be Corda. Maybe token is a special one. Ethereum tends to be the choice for running tokens, but with pretty much every other use cases you can build with all of them.
Okay, thank you. And there is a couple of questions that actually there is Paul from Ben Protocol, Thai company, asking if he saw that Chainlink is working with Kaleido, if you plan to add them in a coming future.
Oh, great.
And
yeah, we're very happy to set up a call and talk with you guys. Again, it's free to get started, and if you have any questions, the best way to reach us is create a ticket. It's right in the UI in the lower right corner.
Okay. And yeah, I think there's, let me read through a bit of questions. There is our friend Charles asking if MetaMask available on mobile, if there is a marketplace and more functionalities on MetaMask mobile. I think for you, Sean.
Yeah, MetaMask on mobile. Let me look up the current state of that. I don't want to misspeak, but I think it's Google Chrome. If you're running like an Android Chrome browser, I believe you can get it on that. It's as of last year, it was in a beta. I think it's out now, so it should be on mobile. And then it's a marketplace. So there's a concept of MetaMask snaps. Snaps. I'll put a link to it in chat, but it's a way for developers to add functionality, basically customize the MetaMask experience when you're on a specific website. So that's sort of like the question asking about the marketplace.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd recommend checking out that. I'll put a link to it in chat.
All right. Actually, there has been quite a lot of questions, technical one during both of your presentations. If you, I tell it to everybody, please reach us at Atato. We will be very happy to put you in contact with Jim or Sean. It's already 8:30, and I know a lot of people have other things to do today. But first, I really would like to thank you both for making it today. It's really special for us to have you out of the US in our Enterprise for Blockchain Meetup. And the community here, we know a couple of people, mostly developers, is very active. And we will give all the links and technical information to all of them here. And we'd like to really thank you again for everything. And yeah, I think we will wrap it up for tonight. And yeah, any questions, we'll forward it to everybody. Thank you so much, both of you. And thank you very much for everybody who attended. I know it's late, but really great to have you on board for this meetup. Okay.
Thanks, Maxime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maxime.
And
stay safe.
Yeah, we will wrap it up for this time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Si je livre le meeting. Thank you.
Voilà, Clément.